we used to talk about the sin of drunkenness. Now we talk about an addiction to alcohol, or we talk about having a disease of alcoholism, and certainly you can't blame someone who has a disease, and it keeps us from taking responsibility for our actions. I remember talking to a teenager one time who, her and her friends had a practice of going out partying. And as she confessed this to me, they would go out partying and drinking. She said, "Oh, but we always take a designated driver along with us." And it was as if having a designated driver along made the drinking okay. Or, we used to talk about, the sin of fornication or premarital sex or of adultery. But, now it's an issue that we talk about safe sex. We don't talk about sexual sin. I remember talking to a 15-year-old boy who was sexually active, and as we were talking about his sexual activity being a sin, he was shocked. He said, "But I practice safe sex." And he thought the practice of safe sex meant that he was practicing a sex that God found to be acceptable. Or what happens when we know it's wrong to gossip, but we share something in the way of a prayer concern? In order that we can have others pray about it, but really what we're interested in is getting this information out so others are aware of what's going on in someone else's life. We have a hard time coming to grips with the fact that we are sinners. We have a hard time accepting the fact that we've fallen short of God's perfect desire for each one of us. Now, I don't struggle with the fact that I'm a sinner, because what Paul says is all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Now, if Paul had written some have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, I'm sure I would be working very hard to justify myself that you're the one that sinned, but I'm all right. But that's not what Paul says. He doesn't say some of us have sinned, but he says it's universal. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now, I remember the night that I experienced God's saving grace in my life. It was on that night that for the first time that I recognized that I need to ask for forgiveness of my sins. It wasn't okay, that it wasn't good enough that I'd grown up in a Christian home. It wasn't good enough that I'd always gone to church. But on that night, I understood for the first time that I needed to ask forgiveness for my sins. I needed to experience God's forgiveness. I needed to experience His saving grace, receive that gift as my own. There are many who strive to be righteous on their own. I don't know how many times I've talked with someone like Pat, who came to me and said, "Well, when I get my life together, then I'll become a Christian. There's a whole bunch of junk going on in my life right now, but when I get my life straightened out, when I become good enough, then I'll become a Christian. Then I'll invite Jesus into my heart and life." What Pat didn't understand was that Jesus didn't come to save the righteous, but He came to save sinners. If we could obtain righteousness on our own, if we could obtain righteousness before God on our own, then we could justify ourselves and we would have no need of being in relationship with Christ. But we can't do it on our own. God's grace, the fact that we need His saving grace in order to make our relationship with God right. In verse 22, Paul writes, "Righteousness from God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe." As Christians, we are righteous before God, not because we are so good, not because of our goodness in an absolute sense, but we are righteous before God because of our connection with Jesus Christ, because of our faith in God's Son. We're not righteous in and of ourselves, but we are righteous by association. A few years ago, I visited inside the walls of the Michigan City Federal Prison, the Federal Penitentiary. I was able to go inside the walls, the walls of that prison as I was being accompanied by one of the chaplains there. And as we walked around gaining access to all the different areas of the prison, when we would walk into a new area, someone would recognize the chaplain and would greet him, and he would say, "He's with me." And because I was associated with the chaplain, because I was with the chaplain, I was able to go anywhere in that prison that the chaplain went. And the really good news was that once the tour was over, I was also able to exit the prison with the chaplain. An eerie feeling as we went through 5 separate locked gates, in order to get out through the wall of that prison. But I was able to go in the prison, walk around the prison, and come out of the prison because of who it was that I was associated with. None of us have a righteousness before God because we are so good. But God, our Heavenly Father, sees us as righteous because as He looks at Jesus, Jesus says, "He's with me." Or He says, "She's with me." We're not righteous because we are perfect. Our righteousness comes as a gift from God, and it's a gift that we must choose to receive in our lives. Anyone who has placed their faith in Jesus Christ is always righteous in God's eyes. Not because they are perfect, not because they do everything right, but because they are associated with Jesus and because their sins have been forgiven. I love the t-shirt that says, "Christians are not perfect, just forgiven." And that's the issue when it comes to us being declared righteous. It's not because we are so good on our own, but we're declared righteous because we're connected with Christ. Well, how are we made righteous? How are we justified before God? Romans 3:24 says, "We are justified freely by His grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ." Justifying or saving grace is made available to us because of Jesus' sacrifice, His death, His resurrection. His death on the cross, His resurrection from the grave. Many years ago, there was a student at Trinity Evangelical Seminary in Chicago who had a passion that he wanted to change the world. He wanted to serve God with all of his heart, and so he tried to figure out a way that he could make a difference. And he felt called to work in the summer in the inner city. So he tried to find a job, and it didn't take him long. He found a job in the inner city driving a city bus. And so as he began his route, on the first day there were a group of boys that got on the bus, and they recognized this was a new bus driver. He was inexperienced. He didn't really know what he was doing, and so as they got on the bus, they ignored paying the fare. They walked on by, and they went back and got a seat on the bus. This went on day after day, and the bus driver got more and more frustrated with these boys that didn't pay a fare as they got on the bus. And one day after they'd gotten on the bus, they were going down the street, and there was a policeman sitting in his car. And so the driver pulled the bus over. He went back and talked to the policeman. The policeman got on the bus and made the boys pay their fare. And the bus driver was feeling pretty good about it, thought he had handled the situation well, and that the problem was cared for. While the policeman left, he pulled away, and only 2 or 3 blocks on down the street, the boys jumped the driver and beat him up and left him there on the bus unconscious. The driver found out that making the boys came with a high personal price for himself to pay.